The storm came down from the hills like a beast. Wind howled through the canyons, carrying dust and rain so fierce it swallowed the sky. James McAllister, the quiet cowboy who owned the last working ranch along Dry Creek, fought his way through the downpour to close the barn doors before the wind ripped them clean off their hinges. He'd seen storms before, the kind that stripped fences and tested faith. But this one felt different, heavier somehow, as if the land itself where the morning sun came soft and golden over the ridges, laying streaks of light across the wet ground. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and clean. James stood on the porch with a tin cup of coffee, watching steam rise from the earth like breath. Behind him, the cabin was quiet except for the faint crackle of dying embers. He could still hear her soft breathing, steady now, no longer the broken sound of a heart unraveling. When Sarah finally stirred, she blinked against the sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, confusion clouded her face. Then memory returned, and she sat up slowly, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "You didn't leave," she murmured. James turned, meeting her eyes. "Wasn't about to," he said. "You had a rough night." She looked down at her hands, the skin still raw from gripping the reins in the storm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I must have made a fool of myself." He shook his head. "You made yourself human. That's not foolish." The words seemed to stop her, as if she hadn't been called human in a long while. He poured another cup of coffee and set it in front of her. She took it carefully, the warmth seeping into her fingers. For a long moment, she said nothing, then spoke softly, almost to herself. "Tom used to make coffee just like this. Burnt and bitter." James smiled faintly. "Guess I'm not much better at it." She looked at him, and for the first time, her lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. "No," she said. "You're better." Outside, the ranch began to wake. Horses shifted in their stalls. The air smelled of wet earth and sage. Sarah stepped outside, letting the wind brush against her face. The world felt open again, too open. "I didn't mean to stay the night," she said, her voice distant. "But when I saw your cabin, I thought maybe I could rest." James leaned against the porch post, arms folded. "You don't need to explain." She turned to him, eyes soft. "You don't understand. I wasn't just running from the storm." Her voice caught, trembling. "There's a man, my husband's brother, Mark. He said I owed him what Tom left behind. He wanted the land, the mule, everything. I told him it wasn't his to take." James's brow furrowed. "And he didn't take kindly to that, did he?" She shook her head. "He said I didn't deserve anything, not even a place to sleep." Her voice dropped lower. "When I left, he followed me halfway to the ridge before the rain came down. I don't know if he's still out there." For a long time, James said nothing. He looked out at the distant horizon, where the trail wound through the hills. Then, quietly, he said, "If he's coming, he'll find this place a hard one to break." Something in his tone made her chest tighten, not fear, but safety. "You'd do that for me?" she asked. He nodded once. "You don't leave someone to wolves, not out here." The hours passed slow, filled with the quiet work of living. Sarah helped hang damp clothes by the fire. She mended a torn saddle strap, her hands steady now. James fixed the fence that the storm had knocked loose. It wasn't spoken aloud, but there was a rhythm between them, a small, wordless understanding that neither was ready to let fade. As afternoon light spilled through the window, Sarah looked around the cabin. "It's peaceful here," she said softly. "Like the world forgets to be cruel for a while." James glanced up from sharpening his knife. "The world's still cruel," he said. "It's just quieter about it here." She smiled, half sad. "Then maybe that's enough." When night came again, the air turned cool, and crickets sang from the grass. Sarah stood by the window, staring into the distance. "Do you think he'll come?" she asked. James didn't look up from the fire he was tending. "If he does, we'll be ready." She turned toward him, her expression fragile but fierce. "I'm tired of being afraid, James." He met her gaze, the firelight flickering between them. "Then don't be," he said simply. "Fear only wins if you run." For a moment, she just looked at him. This man, a few words, this stranger who'd offered her more kindness in one night than others had in years. Then she stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't been here." He looked up, eyes steady. "You'd have survived," he said. "You're stronger than you think." Her eyes filled with quiet tears. "I don't feel strong." "You are," he said, his voice low and sure. "You just forgot." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the night stretched wide and endless, but inside the cabin, the air was warm, filled with something unspoken but real. For the first time since her husband's death, Sarah felt her heart steady, no longer racing from fear but from something else. Something she didn't yet understand but didn't want to lose. Morning. When he turned toward the cabin, he saw her through the curtain of rain, a figure stumbling along the muddy trail, her shawl clinging to her like a second skin. "Ma'am!" he shouted above the wind, running toward her. She didn't stop until she collapsed against him, trembling and soaked through. "Please!" she gasped. "Don't let me go back there." Her eyes, wide and desperate, looked up into his, eyes that had seen too much pain. He carried her inside without another word. The cabin was small but solid, a single room with a fire crackling in the hearth. He set her down by the fire, wrapped her in a blanket, and poured a cup of hot coffee. She took it with shaking hands, her breath ragged. "You're hurt," he said quietly, noticing the torn hem of her dress and the mud streaking her arms. She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Not hurt, just lost." James crouched beside her, watching as she stared into the flames. "My name's James," he said softly. "You're safe here, ma'am." She looked up, her lips trembling. "Sarah," she said finally. "Sarah Boyd." He nodded once, the name settling in his mind like a promise. The widow Boyd, he'd heard of her. Her husband had died last winter in a mining collapse up near Red Ridge. Folks said she'd stayed behind on the homestead, trying to hold on to what little she had. For a while either spoke. The only sound was the wind howling outside and the fire popping in the grate. She seemed smaller now, fragile in a way that stirred something inside him he didn't expect, not pity, but understanding. "You came a long way," he said. She nodded. "The storm hit while I was on the road. I thought maybe I could find help at the old station. But there's nothing there anymore." James sat back in the wooden chair across from her. "You can stay here until it passes," he said. "Ain't much, but it's warm and dry." She looked at him, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. "You don't even know me," she said. "Don't need to," he replied. "You're someone in need, that's enough." Something in his voice broke through her defenses. She put the cup down, hands trembling again, and whispered, "Don't stop. I need this." Her voice cracked, not with desire, but with grief, the kind that builds up until it bursts. She pressed her face into her hands and sobbed, her shoulders shaking. James hesitated only a moment before moving closer. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she cried, not saying a word. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, her cries quieted against his chest. He could feel her heart beating fast, like a frightened bird. "You've been carrying this a long time," he murmured. She nodded against him. "When Tom died," she whispered, "the house didn't feel like home anymore. Every sound reminded me he was gone. The wind, the creak of the boards, the silence, it all just kept telling me I was alone." James's grip tightened slightly, steady and sure. "You ain't alone now," he said. His voice was low, warm, like the fire that flickered across the walls. She looked up at him, tears glistening. "Why are you kind to me?" she asked. He hesitated, staring into the firelight. "Because once someone was kind to me when I didn't deserve it. Maybe I'm just returning the favor." The night deepened. The wind howled, but inside the little cabin, time slowed. Sarah leaned against him, her breath steadying, her pain spilling out in quiet sobs until finally, exhaustion claimed her. He didn't move, didn't speak, just held her as the fire burned low. And for the first time in years, James felt the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time, hope.